Martin Scorsese is one of the most prolific filmmakers of all time. In 1967, his first feature film, Who's That Knocking at My Door, debuted, although he wouldn't become the Martin Scorsese we all know and love until his 1973 movie Mean Streets, which introduced many tropes and trappings that would be present for his whole career. These include the Italian American perspective, a New York setting, themes of Catholic guilt and redemption, toxic masculinity, and organized crime. After Mean Streets, Scorsese went on to direct some of the most important and critically acclaimed movies of all time, including Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, The Wolf of Wall Street, and the music video for Michael Jackson's chart-topping single Bad, not to mention his wide-reaching influence on popular cinema, such as the 2019 supervillain origin movie Joker, which grossed over $1 billion worldwide at the box office. One could be tempted to stop there and say the rest is history, but in my opinion, Martin Scorsese's career tells a story of a changing film industry that has always been hostile to auteurs. This is exemplified in his recent comments against Marvel Studios' offering of blockbuster movies, which caused public outcry from fans of the studio. In a recent profile published by GQ, Scorsese calls these movies, among others, manufactured content, and creates a dichotomy with cinema on the opposing side. In doing so, he seems to be hearkening to the idea of high and low art, with manufactured content being low art and cinema being high art. The author of the GQ piece, Zach Baron, is even apologetic at having brought up the topic when discussing the movie theater industry as a whole. There's a reason the conversation made it into the finished article, though, outside of the temptation of the article going viral. Scorsese's musings on the state of the industry through the lens of manufactured content generally, and Marvel movies specifically, are at the crux of the narrative of his life and his relationship with the film industry, which has changed drastically over the course of his near 60-year career. Throughout the article, Scorsese expresses feelings of loneliness in his old age and his field. As prolific of a director as he is, he's only won one Academy Award personally, and says about the Academy, "I don't know if I think like them. I just mind my own business here." Scorsese and Barron paint a picture of a man who feels isolated from his industry and art form he's dedicated his life to, as it's moved away from where it was when he was just getting his start. He compares the change the film industry has undergone as comparable to the difference between silent films and movies made in the 1970s. I interviewed local filmmaker Nathan Judd for his perspective on the nature of the changes the film industry has undergone, and got his thoughts on Martin Scorsese's musings. Nathan is an alumnus from Brigham Young University's filmmaking program, specializing in documentary film. Nathan's credits include cinematographer for the documentary short Do You See Me, as well as editor for the short film Still. Hi, Nate. Would you mind introducing yourself and just explaining a little bit about your connection to the film industry?
Howdy, hey. Um, my name is Nathan Judd. I've been working in the film industry probably for the past 4 or 5 years in varied areas, from post-production to currently nonfiction production.
So, what were your key takeaways from the article? What'd you think about it?
My main takeaway from the article, I was really surprised with how reflective Martin Scorsese was, but as I kind of thought about his filmography and also how he kind of works within the media, he really does think I just kind of walked away with the impression he thinks a lot about not only what he does but who he is, his legacy as a filmmaker, what he's aiming to achieve with everything that he does. Um, yeah, that was like a big thing that jumped out to me. That I just remember I was so surprised. I was very surprised, which the article is kind of provokes him to be reflexive. He's talking about himself and where he's headed to, what's he gonna do, who is he really, and so I'm just surprised to the level to which he engaged with that. Where I feel like a lot of how high-profile fiction filmmakers might not engage with such questions in an interesting way.
What narrative about film and the industry do you think Scorsese and the author were trying to put forth? Do you think they seem positive or negative about the future of the art form?
There's kind of like an interesting dialogue going on between Scorsese and the author. It seems like the author and Scorsese are both aware of like the potential challenges that will come up because of like film as a medium. Like they're looking at a future in which studios mostly dominate the creative aspect as opposed to just the monetary aspect. Which in the past, I mean, it's always been the same thing that like if you have the money, you have the control. But studios in the past weren't, um, even though they could see, oh, this guy can make a movie and it can make us money. We're looking at something now where the studios determine what makes money, or they determine they really just have a driving force, and they themselves learn their lessons as opposed to the filmmakers. I feel like filmmakers had to learn beforehand what was successful and what wasn't, because if they underperformed, studios wouldn't hire them again. But now studios are the one kind of like taking on that risk, anyways. Kind of pulling back. They both seem to be aware that like there's going to be a change in the future. I like how Martin says that like theaters won't change. It'll just be the movies coming into them, and I agree with that. I think that generally people enjoy participating in film as a medium with people. It's not a very solitary act. I think Scorsese is pretty negative about the future. He doesn't see a whole lot, but I mean, even he must recognize like certain artists like the Safdie brothers, Greta Gerwig, Dan Gilroy. I mean, anybody who's working on anything and is getting in, I mean, the Daniels even. The future of film is still pretty young, and it's just as innovative as I think it was when he was starting out his film career and creating Zolly shots that were quite special for his time.
The main conflict that I seem to get from Scorsese's responses and anecdotes was this sort of idea that an auteur or an artist with a singular vision who breaks the mold has always been at odds with the studio system, but that tension has been exacerbated in recent years. Do you think that that assessment is right? What have you seen that proves or refutes that premise?
There's interesting arguments. I mean, the concept of auteur like started up around when Scorsese was getting big, and we started looking back at not only his filmography, but we started looking back at Hitchcock, and we could see these filmmakers that were really making an impact. And they're just like common motifs across their films. You could tell that somebody was doing something with them. Now it's interesting because like now you could make an argument that what's developing now are auteurs that exist within studio systems. I mean, Kevin Feige being a prime example, someone who's interacting with media, who's receiving the claim. You can tell that they are doing something with the media that they're creating. On the other hand, it's kind of. I mean, we also have directors that are doing this. I mean, Greta's a fine example of this. Jordan Peele, people who are already who have not an entire defined body of work, but I mean that's another part of auteur theory, that they have a defined body of work, which someone like Kevin Feige can create such a huge body of work as a producer. Another good example of this would be James Wan, who's created a huge bed of film because he is a producer, which all kind of like I mean, you can see similarities between the films that he produces as well. Um, yeah, I think auteurs will always be redefined. I think, but basically, it's just amazing to see somebody who comes up who's a solo director who is the auteur behind their projects. I think that's something really significant.
A quote from Scorsese is, "You don't put a film on to learn something, but in the process of watching something, you might come away from it enlightened. I can't put it into words, but you're enlightened in another way." Do you agree with him here? What do you think he meant by enlightened?
I think Scorsese is just noting the emotional impact that film has. I mean, I work in a film in a part of the world where, yeah, you put on a film, not necessarily to learn something, but yeah, to learn is to put it really simple. Like to learn, you think of school, but like enlightened is a good word. And just watched a documentary about June Carter Cash. I mean, I learned a lot about the history of music and the history of June Carter and how she could have easily been a star twice as big as Johnny Cash. But I was enlightened more than anything about her personality. I mean, would you call like how your interaction with somebody, like your relationship to them, is that learning or is it something more? I think it's an exposure, kind of something that, like a connection that you form with the story that ultimately causes you to kind of learn, or what he would say, become enlightened.
He makes a point to commend artists trying their best while making manufactured content. As someone like an editor or a cinematographer who isn't necessarily in control of all aspects of a given production, how do you keep yourself optimistic and be proud of your work, even when you get the sense that the final product isn't going to be good? Is that even something you can tell before the project's finished?
It's kind of interesting that, I mean, I've had a good amount of projects that I've worked on that haven't always gone the way I would have hoped, or more than anything, the final product isn't exactly what um, like. It isn't necessarily going to be the greatest thing I've made, and it's not something I'm necessarily super proud of. But it's really easy to be proud of your work if you're able to just look at your projects as a not just as a finished product, but the process as well, what you learn along the way. I find it invaluable to work with directors who are better than me, because more often than not, they'll um, teach me things I've never known. They show me all sort of lighting tricks, editing tricks that if I didn't take the time to sit down with them and work with them, yeah, I'd just simply never learned these things, and it's just really refreshing.
At one point, Scorsese says the industry is over, referring to the film industry that allowed him to become successful. And even then, it wasn't easy for him. Do you think Scorsese wouldn't get his big break if he were just starting today? Does that affect the way that you approach working in film?
I think he would. I mean, he has well, likely. Mostly because I think he does have such a reflexive attitude that allows him to keep creating without completely destroying himself. He's able to look at his filmography and realize what it's doing, and I think that's a vital part. I think he's also such a go-getter. He's not someone who would just flip over and wouldn't make it. But I agree that his time, the industry that he came from, is completely done. I mean, it's not completely done, but I mean, it's pretty much passing. It's a new era, and I think he's saying this as someone who's very cognizant of film